What if I told you that Lando Norris' biggest rival in 2026 is not Verstappen or Leclerc but Oscar Piastri, his own teammate? Oscar Piastri, the same one who had been defined as the most promising of his generation after his arrival in 2023, had worked in silence, without grandiose statements or gestures of prominence. But what he hadn't said in words, he expressed with lap times and technical mastery. And that message was heard loud and clear by everyone, by the engineers, by the media, by rivals, and by Norris. To understand the real impact of this test, you must first understand Norris's emotional and technical context. He was coming off his most demanding season, consolidating a year where every tenth had cost sweat and every victory had been sculpted based on strategy, precision, and perseverance. He was, finally, the driver McLaren had been waiting for since the days of Senna and Prost. A world champion in papaya orange. His image was everywhere. The media narrative painted him as the face of Woking's new golden cycle. But that narrative had a crack. Because while he was closing publicity commitments and post-championship interviews, his teammate was already operating in the future. Literally. The mule car that Piastri drove was not a 2025 single-seater. It was a hybrid version adapted to the 2026 technical regulations. An unstable, nervous, slippery prototype. A car that demanded adaptability, sensitivity, and an immediate understanding of the new aerodynamic paradigm. Just the kind of challenge that separates the very good from the truly special. And it is here that Norris felt something he had not experienced since 2022, uncertainty. Because that teammate who had been a step behind in average performance throughout the season suddenly looked more comfortable, faster, more solid, behind the wheel of a car with which he had not yet become familiar. It wasn't just that Oscar was driving well. It was that he was reading the future before anyone else. The McLaren coaching staff, always careful with their words, avoided any type of direct comparison. But the body language of the engineers, the way they gathered around Piastri's garage, the looks in the technical meetings, revealed more than any official statement. There was respect. There was surprise. And above all, there was a latent feeling that in 2026, leadership within the team was not going to be guaranteed for anyone. And that is perhaps the biggest threat for a world champion. Not to lose the title to an external rival, but to someone who shares the same color of overalls as you, who listens to the same strategies, who has access to the same information. Because while Max Verstappen or Charles Leclerc can be track enemies, Oscar Piastri is a silent threat. One that breathes in the same garage. And now, after the Abu Dhabi test, that threat is no longer an assumption. It's a reality. December 9, 2025 did not seem, at first glance, to be a particularly momentous day. It was the season finale, a simple post-race test in Abu Dhabi, where teams used to collect data and fulfill development commitments. But this time it wasn't just any test. What was at stake was not the preparation for 2025. It was the first real look at the 2026 regulations, a new technical world that was beginning to rear its head on the track. The mule cars deployed at Yas Marina were modified versions of the 2025 chassis. Mechanically they were similar, but aerodynamically they were trimmed, simplified, radically different. Pirelli had brought the first prototypes of tires adapted to the new philosophy. Less downforce, greater mechanical resistance, less dependence on the vortices generated by the ground. Formula One, once again, was reinvented. And that environment of technical uncertainty and radical change became the perfect setting for Oscar Piastri to leave his mark. While other drivers used the day to complete long runs without pressure, or worked on simulator correlations, Piastri approached the car as if it were the first qualifying session of a new era. From the first laps, he demonstrated something that cannot be manufactured or trained. Sensitivity. Sensitivity to understand the behavior of the car under these new rules. Sensitivity to identify the exact point at which the rear axle begins to lose grip. Sensitivity to control a car that seemed to have a life of its own. He set a time of 1 minute and 26.099 seconds, the second best of all the drivers who rode with the 2026 configuration. Only Kimi Antonelli beat him, and he did so using an experimental rear wing with active aerodynamics, a device that not all teams were allowed to test. But time was not the most relevant thing. It was what that time symbolized, pure adaptability. Because what Piastri achieved was not simply a fast lap. It was to demonstrate that his driving style, honed in categories like F3 and F2, where the car always goes to the limit of grip, was perfectly compatible with what F1 is about to become. He knew how to handle the car's natural oversteer. He knew how to float on the track without punishing the tires. He knew where he could attack and where it was best to let go. On the other side of the garage, Lando Norris opted for a conservative approach. He focused on long runs, on degradation tests, on data collection. His best time was outside the overall top 10, even behind some rookies who ran with conventional 2025 cars. Although his work was valuable for the team, the comparison with Piastri was inevitable. Because when you place two pilots in similar conditions, and one of them shines with its own light, the perception changes. And in Formula One, perception is power. Inside McLaren, engineers began to take notice. The telemetry data showed that Piastri was capable of entering deeper into curves without losing the rear axle, that his throttle modulation was more precise in low grip situations, and that he better managed the transition between mechanical grip and aerodynamic grip. In other words, he was already driving as if 2026 had begun. This test was not just a technical session. It was a statement. Not written, not verbalized, but it is timed. Oscar Piastri had placed himself in the conversation not as a squire, but as a possible technical leader of the McLaren 2026 project. And that changes everything. What happened in Abu Dhabi was more than a test. It was a crack in that philosophy of peace. Because no matter how much McLaren tries to protect its structure, the truth is that the most dangerous competition is the one that happens inside your own garage. There is no place to hide. There are no excuses that can soften the comparison. When the same car gives different results in the hands of different drivers, tension is inevitable. And that tension is already felt. Lando Norris, although champion, knows that his margin for error has been drastically reduced. He no longer competes only against Verstappen, Leclerc, or Russell. He competes against his own reflection, that reflection called Oscar Piastri that becomes more threatening every day. The question floating around the paddock is simple, but devastating. Can McLaren maintain harmony if both drivers are fighting for the title? Andrea Stella, team leader, has been meticulous in avoiding statements that position one above the other. He has not named a number one driver for 2026. He has not hinted at favoritism. But that silence also communicates. In Formula One, when there are no explicit hierarchies, the track is the one who imposes them. And so far, the track is sending signals that the balance of power could shift. In summary, McLaren's 2026 will not only be a technical test with new regulations. It will be an emotional test. Personality management, of ego control, strategic decision-making under constant pressure. Because the team may have the fastest car, but if it fails to handle the Cold War that is beginning to brew between its drivers, that performance may become irrelevant. And perhaps the greatest irony of all is this. It has taken McLaren more than a decade to get back to the top. He has built a winning car, he has won a championship, he has formed an elite couple of drivers. But that same success, if not managed wisely, can become the trigger for a new crisis. Because sometimes the real enemy is not up front on the track. It's right next door in the adjacent box. In Formula One, what defines a season is not just victories or championships. What really immortalizes it is the story that surrounds it. And 2026, even before starting, is already writing its own. What we witnessed in the Abu Dhabi test was not a simple technical exercise. It was the prologue to a battle that threatens to divide one of the strongest teams on the grid into two opposite poles. On one side, the current champion, Lando Norris, finally consecrated after years of effort, sacrifice, and constant evolution. On the other, Oscar Piastri, the emerging figure who has not come to learn, but to conquer. And in the middle, McLaren. A team that after decades of ups and downs has returned to the technical and sporting peak, but that now faces the most difficult dilemma of all: how to manage two titans under the same roof, with identical objectives and egos that no longer fit into the same narrative. 2026 promises to be a year of fire not only because of the new rules, the aerodynamic challenges, or the transformation of the cars. It will be because each Grand Prix weekend will be a new chapter in a story that is already on. A story that will not be written only in the statistics books, but on the internal radio stations, in the tense engineering meetings, in the strategy decisions at the limit, in the awkward post-race silences. All of this will build a season where every tenth will be a cry of power, and every team order, a contained declaration of war. And the most uncomfortable question of all is not whether McLaren can win the title. They have already shown that they have the car, the personnel, and the capacity to do it. The real question is whether they can survive themselves. Whether they can maintain internal harmony while their two most talented pilots face off for something that only one can have: absolute control of the narrative. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.